Unable to quickly react to changes, U.S. retailers constantly lose up to 6% of their margins, resulting in a $46 billion problem annually. Rising inflation and overstocks require immediate reaction. Competera's competitive data and demand-driven price recommendations allow retailers to keep prices both economically justified and attractive for consumers with no delay. Visit competera.net and see how Competera's AI pricing solutions can increase your gross margin by 6%.
Welcome to Total Retail Talks, your podcast channel for retail knowledge.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Talks. I'm Joe Keenan, the editor-in-chief of Total Retail. I'm here at the CRMC show in Chicago, and I'm joined on this episode by Michael Cleavinger, who is the Global Commercial Data Science Lead at PepsiCo. Michael actually presented a session here at the show earlier in the week, and we're going to have some questions about that. So thanks for joining me on today's show, Michael.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So why don't you go ahead and provide a little context for our audience and tell us about your particular role at PepsiCo, as well as a little bit about your professional background.
Yeah, my role at PepsiCo is really leading and solving problems with AI and ML. So using data science to solve big problems that are actually commercially viable. So not a back research lab kind of an approach, but out in the field. I like to think about it kind of like Indiana Jones. So he's the guy who's out in the field trying to solve all these pieces, but he also has an academic background to be able to be a professor. So that's the way we look at our project of how do we actually solve real problems with lots of data in the real world where it gets messy. And it's not always clean, it's not always easy.
Yeah. Bringing that kind of a fun analogy to talk about data, the kind of Indiana Jones analogy. So you spoke here apropos on data strategy. So tell us a little bit about what PepsiCo is doing to ensure that it has a sound strategy in place for the, all the different things that when we think about data, the collection of it first to start, the management of it, the cleaning of it, kind of the analysis, and then actually ultimately taking action upon it. Tell us a little bit about kind of that process at PepsiCo, both for your customer data, your product data as well.
Yeah, for PepsiCo, we have a different kind of view towards our customers because they're a lot of our stores, our retail partners. And then we look at consumers and we also look at shoppers. You probably think about the way that you get your products and you have different people who are shopping for them in your household, and then you're consuming them with different people. And so you have to think about how do you approach that from a high level view. And that changes the way you look at your data. And data strategy is really important to us right now because the way that we brought in our data has been for financial reporting, or it's been developed over decades of use. And it's not quite ready for AI and ML. It's not ready for the things we're trying to make it do. And so there's this new process where we need to go back and revisit our data to say, what data do we have? Do we have the right information? What insights are we trying to drive? And how are we aligning that so we can actually be effective in the way we're using our information? And that leads exactly like you spoke about the preparation of data. Most data science projects, 70% upwards of the time that they spend on them is focused on data preparation or data cleaning. And so it's how do you reduce that time but still be efficient with what you're trying to do? And I think it really goes back to looking at how you're gathering the data. What does that data mean? And what can you do to change that in the future? So we're doing a lot of work around that right now.
That gathering the data piece, tell us a little bit about that, because you mentioned you have a kind of an interesting setup where your customers are many times stores, retailers, but then you have the end consumer, which obviously you want to know about them. So tell us a little bit about how you try to learn about each of those kind of endpoints that you're gathering data from.
So when we're looking for information, we try to first start with the business problem. What are we trying to solve? What's the real question that we have? Because that's going to determine what kind of data you actually want and what data you have. And so we look to say, are we trying to solve something for a retail partner? Are we trying to solve something for our end consumer? And that will help determine which way we're looking at the data, because you might have the same data source, but it's going to come in from different perspectives of the way you want to use that data or bring it in. And so we identify what that is, and then when we are looking towards the data, it might be an aggregated data set for a retailer, where it might be very direct and low line level data for a consumer. And in our area, we're not selling cars, we're not selling these big ticket items, and so we often don't see those individual transactions for those consumers. And so we have to start doing some probabilistic statistics and all these fun little things in the background to get better ideas of how to actually connect with our consumers in a way that makes sense. So we get the right products to them in the right spot, we give them the right messaging at the right timing. overall, we connect with over 1 billion people every day. So we have people across the world that are eating and drinking PepsiCo products and beverages and snacks and cereals. And so it's a way that we need to think about how are we a part of their life and how do we make it easier for them to just live the rest of their life and be a part of that process.
Yeah, you talk about the massive scale in which you're operating. So that technology tools that your team uses and works with, obviously critical to the work you're doing. I'm interested, maybe you can share an example or two, Michael, of how you're leveraging data to help inform decision making. And that could be related to customer experience. It could be supply chain, marketing. You've brought up kind of each of those already. Tell us a little bit about, if you have an example or two of how you've leveraged some of the data that you've collected, cleaned, and then utilized.
Yes. So for me, I thought about this a little bit because I think I'm biased. When I look at this, I think of where have I not used data to actually make decisions. I use it in every decision we're making. And there's a gap, though, that comes from the data science group who has all the data, who has all these insights. And then as we hand it off to our marketers or our supply chain, are they really using that to make the end decision? Are they really using that to make that final call? Or is that just a part of their process? And so a lot of what we do is also helping people understand that data science, and if you're using machine learning, it's not trying to create something brand new, but it's trying to make it easier or faster or bring new insights in a quicker way, more readily available. It's not trying to replace a person, but actually just give them a better viewpoint into the solution of what is available. And so part of that process means that we have to step into this area where we give ideas and we kind of do a secondary check to their gut check of this is what they're looking to do. We've got people who have worked in the industry for 25 years and they know what to do, but they can't describe why. And so we try to learn from that and help kind of create these new tools that can help other people who are brand new in the field or who are coming in to do different types of assortment optimization and have that same level of detail without having to build up 25 years of experience. But it's hard to know where the data is really being used or where it's not being used after it kind of leaves what we're doing. So it's all about how do we build up the trust and that connection to our internal customers as well as our external customers to give the right examples. So one example of where we do this is with assortment optimization. And that sounds a little odd, but it's really about how do you make sure the right products are in the right store for the right people. If you think about where you shop, you're probably going to multiple stores even within a given week for different reasons and different purposes, and that's going to change. Now, you don't want to change the layout of a store every time you walk into it or else it gets confusing and you don't want to be a part of that. So it's how do you make sure that you're getting those right items for the right people where they're actually coming into the store. Some of the things we've looked at are when people are driving towards work, they're going to want different types of things in the morning than when they're driving back away from work. And they'll turn in the United States into a right-handed turn a lot more easily than into a left-handed turn. And so you'll see those different switches that can come around where you may have stores that are right across from each other on the street that have different assortment needs for the different shoppers at different times.
Times a day, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where we use a lot of our data to take all these billions of rows of data in the back end. How do you put that together? And if you have someone who's in that store every day for years, they know those differences. But it's how do you make that easier for them so they don't have to think about everything. They don't have to think about what the weather is next week when they place their order. They can just get those recommendations and they can work on that relationship that people do really well with the actual people in the store, with the store managers, with the consumers and the shoppers who are there.
That paints a great picture and actually is a good lead-in for the next question I wanted to talk about, which is the level of collaboration between you and your team and then the other departments within the organization to ensure that, like you said, you're kind of handing it off this data and saying, here's the data. There's going to be some human element to that they're going to make some gut decisions or they're going to rely on some of their experience, but backed by data, hopefully. Tell us about kind of how you work with and share that data with your other teams in the organization.
The way we approach is a little different. It's not a direct handoff in between different groups because we want to be part of that process. When you look at data science right now in the world, I like to look back at what was happening a couple decades ago. As Six Sigma came into play, we started building these new strategies and we had new ways of looking and identifying problems and solving problems from a higher level perspective. Data science is now stepping in and just taking that one step further to give you an action that you can take on it. But if you don't understand the strategy or if you're not connected to that business problem at the beginning, you're not going to be successful. And we've seen this time and time again with lots of big companies who are really great, technology companies who know what they're doing, and they launch something and they say, oh, here's our new AI solution, and it fails. And people get a little disillusioned and they say, why is that happening? It's because they're not connected and understand the business problem. Or as they take that on, they go through the entire process, create a model, and they don't check back at the end to say, did we actually solve the business problem? Or did we learn something in between? Because you might learn something new about the business that you didn't know that needs to then update that model. Or you need to then go back and say, well, we went down a wrong rabbit hole. And this is really interesting to the data scientist, but it doesn't make sense to the end user who's actually going to be the recipient of those insights. And so it's all about how to get those actionable insights that actually make sense to the people who are using them.
Do you find that to that point, actionable but also explainable too? Do you find that you're then going and meeting and saying, like, here's what we're seeing from the data, what's your take on this, and kind of collaborating that way as well?
I do. I think there are 3 different ways to describe AI as the acronym. So you've got your artificial intelligence that you do, and then from there you get accessible insights. And those are the explainable pieces that you can actually say, this is what those deeper learning models mean. And then from those accessible insights, it goes into actionable insights. And that means that you're the commercially viable. This is not something that's going to just sit in the back end and not do anything, but it's actually something that makes a difference. Now, the hard part is sometimes there's a gap between what's statistically optimized and what makes sense in the real world. Because the real world doesn't always operate where you can make 1,800 different choices in a store. It's limited, and you might have to reduce that down. So it's not the statistical best option available, but it's the best option that makes sense for how execution can occur.
Tell us a little bit about, you've talked about artificial intelligence and machine learning, obviously critical to your data strategy at PepsiCo. Tell us a little bit about how those technologies, one, you're working with them, and also two, kind of the business performance gains that you see from them.
We see a lot. By themselves, they don't do anything. So AI, ML, data by itself does nothing. And so it's, again, back to that connection to the business of where you're executing or how you're going to use those to make it useful. We are really ramping up what we do inside of AI and ML to make it easier, because there's a lot of knowledge that gets lost as people move around or they retire or they add in new different products and new insights. And it's hard to grasp that across the entire world. But if we can take learnings that we've had from Europe and what we are doing in Spain, and we can apply that into what we're doing inside the United States, or from Canada, and we can apply that over to Thailand, then we can be much more effective as this global company. But it's hard to do that if you're looking across just data that's inside of Canada or data that's inside of Thailand. It's how do you use some machine learning on the back end to pull that together across all of that data that people can't get their heads around, and using some really advanced math, but to pull it into an actionable and accessible insights that you can utilize. So that's our focus, is how to do that part of it and scaling that more quickly throughout the company.
And obviously a global company, is that modeling some of that data across different regions then? And then how does that apply to what you're doing to determine and provide actionable insights to teams in different regions of the world?
Absolutely. So we're connected in with all of our different teams, and we're working with the different groups to help them see what's being done in different areas. But there are very similar markets. For example, in Mexico, it's a very similar market to Turkey. And so you can take learnings that you have in Mexico City and apply those into Turkey in a unique way that you wouldn't typically think of. So there's the concept of digital twins that are out there. There's a lot of digital twin cities where people are very similar in different locations and different regionalities, and you can use the data and the AI and the ML behind it to help pull those together. For example, if you were launching a new product, so we brought a product from Australia, Red Rock Deli chips, and we brought those into the United States, we're able to see who those people are in Australia and who is buying them and who the consumers are and what are they behaviors, and do they have big families or small families, and how do they, is it a single purchase or is it an impulse purchase or is it a sharing purpose of having the chips, and then being able to apply that into the United States to be more effective in your launch of the brand. So we can start looking across and getting those insights beyond what we typically would do.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you're able to, one, the Mexico and Hungary examples, it's find that fascinating that you're able to then drill down to a level where you're able to make that connection. You say, like, okay, the behavior in Mexico is very similar to the behavior of the consumer in Hungary. Here's how then we try to treat those customers the same.
Yeah, it's something where it starts to make sense. We're in a really connected world now. And so you have people who are in the same age groups who are very similar across multiple countries, multiple markets, and they behave in a very similar way. But typically we want to put segments around people. We want to say this group is, well, in this market, and so they behave this way. And we know that it doesn't ever work to put people all in one group or bucket. And now we don't have to. We don't have to do this clustering at a very high level. We can go more granular if you're able to execute at that level. So I'd say our focus is where can you go to the lowest level of execution, and then doing the insights and analysis at that level. It could be that it's a store in an area. It could be a postal code. It could be a region or a market. But if you're able to think about your data from an archetype perspective of understanding what data you're gathering, how you're applying it, then you can share insights across all those different markets in the world. And you can get information from those different areas to help.
And the store level and consumers.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Completely right.
And then lastly, Michael, you talked here at the show, but also for those in our audience, I'm sure there's some that are listening that would love advice from you and from your expertise on what other retailers and brands that are maybe potentially looking to develop a more refined data strategy. What should they be thinking about? What should they be doing to get that started?
I'd say the first thing I'd recommend is just start. That's the thing that really holds back a lot of the brands is they want to get perfect data. They want to get perfect AI, ML. It's really hard to get the right types of people who can do these types of work right now because they're in such high demand. So just start with what you can. It's not going to be great. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you a chance to start, then to adjust. Everything in this concept of data science and AI and ML and data is iterative. So you're going to learn from what you're doing, and you're going to take that approach, and you have to be willing to fail. And I wouldn't focus on failing. No, I think it's about how do you fail intentionally, where you make choices of what you're trying to deliver, and then you are willing to be honest with yourself and your teams about was this a good and accurate choice or not, and then celebrate those points where you find that you have new improvements that you can make. So I think it's really focusing on that, and then taking a step back and looking at your underlying data. Do you have the right information? Do you need to partner with other people? Do you need to get more information for those insights? Do you need to adjust the way that you're getting your data? I think the next real big change inside of this area is going to be a focus of the data itself. And we're going to realize, this data wasn't generated the way I assumed it was. And we're going to have new ways of gathering data with IoT devices and connections to different people and all the digital connections that are flowing in that can be unique. And they're going to help us then rethink how are we gathering and aggregating that information. And we can't just trust the data we've had for the last decade and assume that it is as accurate as we've thought it has been, because we have the right tools now to pull that apart.
Yeah. At a company the size of PepsiCo, the scale at which you operate, that iteration I'm assuming is happening continuously. For somebody that might be on a smaller scale, how often should they be evaluating whether the data that they're using and acting on is appropriate, and the kind of that evaluation phase? How quickly and often do you think that should take place?
I'll take the cheap answer out and say it depends as you go through it. That's the easy answer. But what I'd say is for a lot of what we're doing, we actually adjust it based on a weekly or even faster process. To get a little technical, but not too technical, there's processes called CI/CD flow, where you have this continual improvement and continual deployment of your models. And so you're able to take this and adjust and adapt every week. You're able to adjust as often as you want, so you can make sure that your models and your data is accurate.
Yep. Great. Well, I want to take the opportunity to thank Michael Cleavinger, again, the Global Commercial Data Science Lead at PepsiCo, for joining us on this episode of Total Retail Talks here at CRMC. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Talks.
Don't know how to offset growing costs without losing customers or selling out stock? Competera can help you maintain optimal prices without compromising on gross margin or losing your customer loyalty. Visit competera.net to learn how.